Mr Speaker.
I call David Seymour, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on behalf of the ACT Party in support of this bill. And wasn't it fascinating to listen to the last minute of the speech by the member who just resumed her seat when she actually got on to addressing the bill instead of being a bundle of self-righteous fury with nothing constructive to add, no solutions and no real understanding of what's being debated by other members. But Mr Speaker, what I'd like to address is the fact that these housing markets that we have in New Zealand are dysfunctional. Mr Speaker, the number of houses built in Auckland in the past decade is 20% fewer than in the 1990s, despite very strong price signals that the supply of housing in Auckland needed to rise. That is a dysfunctional market. And unfortunately, over a long period of time, 8 years now, this government has done what the government before it did. Nothing substantial to change the dynamics of that market. And these special housing areas, I'm sorry to say, are an island of fantasy in a sea of dysfunctional markets. They are they symbolise a belief that the government can somehow wish away the dynamics that have led to dysfunction in our housing markets in a few small areas and suspend all of the things that they have not fixed anywhere else. Mr Speaker, of course, if the government was serious, there would be serious Resource Management Act reform, serious reform to the laws around building and land use planning, and a serious consideration of the fiscal incentives that councils have, because at the moment councils get most of the cost of development, while central government gets most of the revenues. And so it's not surprising that councils are unwilling to do or allow a great deal of building in their jurisdictions, that we have a shortage of supply and an inelastic supply of housing, rising prices and all of the social, economic and financial problems that creates. So, Mr Speaker, it's with some regret that we sit under urgency supporting this bill, which is really tacking on this, what shall we say, islands of fantasy in a sea of dysfunctional housing markets tonight, in order that we can carry on with the few projects that have actually succeeded, not to mention the various perverse incentives that have come out of the special housing areas to date. Mr Speaker, part two is considerably more concerning. If part one is merely not very effective, then part two of this bill, both as in terms of property rights and in terms of procedure, should be of great concern to New Zealanders, because what it says is that this government, or any future government, and colleagues, sometimes that's one thing we need to think about, can take land acquired perhaps under the Public Works Act for one purpose, and then can develop housing on it and dispose of it without any of the normal safeguards of right of first refusal to the original owner. And I'm a bit surprised that the Labour Party and the Green Party in New Zealand First are opposed to that. Generally speaking, they want the government to be developing housing through any means necessary. But oddly enough, it's the National Party, the party of free enterprise occasionally, who appear to be proposing that the government be able to ride roughshod over normal property rights in order to build low-cost housing. Mr Speaker, it is a topsy-turvy world, but I think one thing that's going to be very clear is that the committee stage of this debate, or of this compressed reading, is going to be very, very interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing what supplementary order papers are sitting on the table that might ameliorate the difficulties we have as a House with abrogating New Zealanders' property rights and due process under the Public Works Act in a single night of urgency, particularly when members on my immediate left think hard about what that might mean in the hands of future governments. So I'm not quite sure where that committee stage is going to land. But it's somewhere that members need to focus their attention very carefully, because to start abrogating safeguards of New Zealanders' property rights in the middle of the night under urgency is not the way that the ACT Party believes we should be doing things in this House. And so, Mr Speaker, With those comments, I'll resume my seat supporting this bill for its second reading, but I think there's the potential for things to evolve a little bit as the night goes on. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call Maureen Pugh.